The Free Thinker Show. Ignite your mind, challenge the norm.
Hey, deep divers. Ready for a deep dive?
Yeah.
Today, we're headed to El Salvador.
Going behind bars, actually. We're diving into their prison system, specifically the changes under President Nayib Bukele.
Yeah, it's a wild story. We've got articles, news reports, even a glimpse inside that notorious Terrorism Confinement Center.
And let me tell you, it's way more complicated than any headline can capture.
Seriously. I mean, we all heard about El Salvador being like the murder capital of the world, right? But then Bukele comes in, declares a state of emergency, and boom, things are different.
Different, for sure. But the how is where things get really interesting, because this state of emergency, yeah, it's credited with reducing crime, but it also brings up huge questions about human rights.
Okay, so like detaining people without trial, things like that.
Exactly. Limiting legal recourse, too. These aren't small details.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So we've got this pressure cooker, right? Extreme violence, a new president with a hard line.
And then you drop this massive new prison into the mix, the CECOT.
Right, and it's almost like a movie set. Those images they released, row after row of shaven-headed prisoners.
The imagery is 100% intentional. The Terrorism Confinement Center is as much a symbol as a building. It's supposed to send a message: gang activity, not tolerated.
Makes sense. So
Yeah.
how do they get that message across? What are the conditions like inside?
In a word, severe.
Severe how? What are we talking about here?
We're talking limited light, minimal contact with the outside world, constant surveillance.
Wow. Just from that, it sounds like they're trying to erase any sense of individual identity. Is that a common thing in prisons? Or is this unique to El Salvador?
Well, harsh conditions sadly aren't rare in prisons, worldwide.
True.
But the scale and intensity of El Salvador's approach, that's what makes it stand out. The CECOT, specifically, it seems like deterrence is the main goal. It's about sending a message to anyone thinking about joining a gang and showing just how serious they are about cracking down.
And it seems like it's working, at least to some degree. I mean, there are reports about people actually moving back to El Salvador,
Yeah.
businesses reopening, areas that were like no-go zones are bustling again.
And this is where things get complicated, ethically speaking, because, yeah, people do feel safer. Undeniably.
Right.
But at what cost? And is it even sustainable? I mean, under the surface of all these positive changes, there's still so much we don't know about what's happening in these prisons.
Right. It's almost like choosing between two bad options.
Yeah.
Put up with horrific gang violence or maybe have to sacrifice some freedoms for a sense of security.
Exactly. And that's not even considering the potential for innocent people getting caught up in all of this. We've heard stories like that mother whose son is in prison without even a chance to defend himself.
Oh, wow.
When you have such a sweeping approach, when due process is basically sidelined, there's a huge margin for error.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got this effective but potentially really problematic system. So where does rehabilitation come in? Are they just locking people up, or is there an actual effort to figure out, like, why people join gangs in the first place?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's one that El Salvador really needs to answer if they want to stop this cycle of violence. Now, the government claims they're focused on rehabilitation. They've released some info about work programs, prisoners making furniture, repairing vehicles, even destroying old gang tombstones.
Destroying tombstones. That's
Yeah.
symbolic, to say the least.
Yeah.
But, I mean, does any of that actually get at the deeper issues? The poverty, the lack of opportunity, the trauma? Like, those are the things that drive people to gangs in the first place, right?
Exactly, and that's what we need to dig into, because a chair or a fussed-up car, those might offer a distraction in the short term.
Yeah.
But they don't address the deeper issues, the poverty, the lack of opportunity, the stuff that really pushes people down this road.
It's like they've got these harsh prison conditions, but where's the carrot? What are they offering these guys to help them build a life outside of gangs?
And that's where our deep dive gets even more interesting, because to really grasp the impact of what El Salvador is doing, we need to look beyond the prison walls. What happens when someone gets out?
Right.
What kind of support is there? Are they set up for success? Or are they basically guaranteed to end up back in the system? Those are the questions we need to ask. And that's where the information gets a little fuzzy, There hasn't been much access for journalists or anyone to really look into these reintegration programs.
Right.
The government's put out some promotional stuff, but it's hard to know how effective it actually is.
Yeah, it's a bit of a black box then. We know people are going in. We see glimpses of what they're doing inside. But what happens when they come out? Are they just walking right back into the same environments that led them to gangs in the first place?
That's the big concern, right? And it highlights something really important. Dealing with gang violence, it's not just about punishment, it's about breaking the cycle.
Totally.
You could have the scariest prison in the world, but if you're not giving people a real alternative...
It's just going to keep happening.
Exactly. You're just kicking the can down the road.
So, okay, let's talk about those alternatives. What needs to happen outside the prison walls to give these guys, former gang members, a real shot at a different life?
Well, for one thing, they need jobs. Real economic opportunity.
Right.
A lot of these guys come from poverty, right? And joining a gang, that's belonging. It's protection.
Yeah.
And it's often the only way they see to make money.
So it's not enough to just have those job training programs inside.
No.
They need actual jobs lined up for when they get out.
Absolutely. And not just any jobs either. We're talking jobs that pay a living wage, you know?
Yeah.
Jobs that give them some sense of purpose.
Yeah.
There has to be this clear message. There's a place for you here in this new El Salvador. You can contribute. You can be a valuable part of society.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like a massive, massive undertaking. Are there any other countries that have actually managed to deal with this kind of deeply rooted gang problem?
It's a long road, definitely.
Yeah.
But there are examples we can look at. Like, take programs in places like Nicaragua or Guatemala. They've had some success focusing on, like, community-based stuff, social support, job training, even microloans, helping former gang members start their own businesses.
So it's not just about punishing them for being in a gang. It's about actually giving them the power to change.
Right. Giving them the tools and support to build a new life for themselves.
Got it.
And it takes a multi-pronged approach. It's not just about jobs. It's about education, mental health services, trauma-informed care.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys, they've experienced some serious trauma.
Well, absolutely. Both as victims and perpetrators of violence. Dealing with those underlying wounds, that's huge if you want to break the cycle.
So it's not about building a bigger, tougher prison. It's about investing in the whole picture. Education, mental health, giving people real opportunities.
Exactly. It's about giving people hope.
Hope. That's a powerful thing.
It really is. And that's what makes this whole El Salvador situation so fascinating, so ethically complicated. Because, yeah, they've reduced violence, it's undeniable.
Yeah.
But whether it lasts, that all depends on what they do next. Will they use this opportunity to actually address the root causes of gang violence?
Right.
Or will they just, settle for a quick fix, a temporary solution achieved through force and intimidation?
It's like they bought themselves some time with this crackdown.
Yeah.
But what they do with that time, that's what matters.
Exactly.
If they don't invest in those long-term solutions, it was all for nothing. All that repression, all those people locked up.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And it's a question that goes way beyond El Salvador, too.
100%. The whole world is watching.
Yeah.
How this all plays out, it'll impact how other countries deal with this kind of thing.
It's like El Salvador's running this giant experiment with, like, really high stakes.
And just like any experiment, you're going to have unexpected results, unintended consequences.
Right.
That's what makes this so fascinating and so important to keep an eye on. Because what they learn from this, it could have a ripple effect way beyond El Salvador.
Okay, so I've got to ask, what are people actually saying about all this? Like, within El Salvador?
Yeah.
Are there people speaking out against it?
Yeah.
I mean, it can't all be positive, right?
You're right to be skeptical. While a lot of people seem to support Bukele's approach, at least that's what we're seeing, it's not everyone. Human rights groups, both inside El Salvador and internationally, they're really worried. They're talking about due process violations, potential abuse inside the prisons, even the long-term effects on their democracy.
So it's this tension, then, between wanting to be safe, but also wanting to protect people's rights. Is there any way to do both? Or is it one or the other?
That is the million-dollar question that El Salvador is facing right now. Can you actually fight gang violence without compromising human rights?
Right.
There are no easy answers. Some people say in extreme cases, like what El Salvador is dealing with, you have to compromise somewhere.
Okay.
That sometimes you need to use a heavy hand to get things under control.
But how far is too far,
Yeah.
And who gets to make that call?
Exactly. That's the danger, right? Once you start chipping away at civil liberties, even if you say it's for safety, it's tough to go back. And that's why you need transparency, accountability, independent eyes on the prisons, journalists being able to report on what's happening, a justice system that actually works. Those things are crucial. They're the only things that can prevent things from getting out of control.
It seems like there are still a lot of unknowns when it comes to what El Salvador is doing. It's like they jumped without looking, hoping they'll figure out how to land on the way down.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting to watch. It forces us to ask some tough questions
Yeah.
about safety versus freedom, about how much power the government should have, about whether the rest of the world should get involved when things like this happen.
Wow. Well, deep divers, this deep dive took us to some unexpected places. We started with a prison system, and we ended up talking about the core of what makes a functioning society.
And that's really what it's all about. Prison systems, they're like a mirror to the societies they exist in.
That's a good way to put it.
They show us our values, what we care about, and yeah, sometimes our failures too. And in El Salvador's case, the story's still being written.
It is. It definitely is. And that's why we have to keep asking the tough questions. Keep paying attention to what's going on in El Salvador, even if it's not making headlines every day. Because what they choose to do now, it'll echo for decades.
Without a doubt. This isn't just about one country, one prison system. It's about something much bigger. It's about justice, security, and figuring out how to create a society that's both safe and fair.
Deep divers, that was a lot. We covered some heavy stuff today. From the cells of that CECOT prison to the future of El Salvador itself. We saw how a nation grapples with a difficult past and an uncertain future. But one thing's for sure, this is a story that needs our attention. So if you're as hooked as we are, check out the show notes for links to the articles and reports we talked about. Until next time, stay curious, deep divers. Keep asking those tough questions.